In 1972, businessman Christopher Janus came here for what he hoped would be the final act in a drama that had obsessed him for half a lifetime. He was in good company. The treasure he came here to grasp was prized by a crown prince, coveted by an emperor, and held the world in its thrall from the moment it was first uncovered. Janus raced to the top of the Empire State Building to meet a mysterious widow who read about his quest in the New York Times. Now 90, he remembers the afternoon as if it were yesterday.
It was just about here that I stopped, had a view of the southern part of the island here, turned around and was waiting for this woman. After she'd seen all the publicity in the New York Times, she says, "I think I have what you want. I can't be seen with you, it's too dangerous. I'll meet you at the top of the Empire State Building." She said, "My husband warned me that this was a dangerous thing, but these fossils are my legacy." I said, "Well, you can be sure of 150,000. I think the State Department will equal it." "Oh," she said, "that isn't. My husband told me that these fossils were worth maybe $1 million. And then she opened her black purse and she showed me a picture of a footlocker with fossils in it. But as we were talking, there was a couple of Japanese tourists down at the end there. They were taking pictures of the battery or whatnot, and she thought that they were trying to take pictures of her. And with that, she became startled. She grabbed the photograph, she got out of there, and she went away. But the FBI got involved in it. And I don't know whether they ever found her or not, but I never heard from her again.
He made numerous visits to China, his mission sanctioned by President Ford, his confusion shared by the FBI.
These are the remains of, how many? 47 people. Parts of men, women, and children. This is the most important finding of this sort ever. No one, it's the greatest discovery, and it's now the greatest loss.
The remains were 500,000 years old. Today, he is no nearer to knowing what became of Peking man. Ever since Darwin published the theory of evolution, archaeologists had faced a problem. They dug up the remains of ancient apes and early humans. They couldn't find the middle man, the missing link. It was in China in 1923 that they uncovered a tooth that changed everything. Jiqudian, 35 miles from Peking. Archaeologists digging here uncovered the molar, then more fossilized fragments of a whole community of ape people. They'd used stone tools and cooked with fire. It seemed the missing link had been found. Chinese archaeology was front-page news the world over. Academics flocked to the dig. The Crown Prince of Sweden gave it royal status, and the Americans paid all the bills. The fossil finds continued for more than 10 years. Peking man was, and still is, a source of immense national pride. The first humans were apparently Chinese. No one could have predicted that just 18 years later, the remains would have vanished. They've been the cause of diplomatic scandal, the quarry of secret agents, a gift to conspiracy theorists. 60 years on, the Chinese are still in mourning for their ancestors that disappeared into thin air. Dr. Wang Dao lectures on Chinese archaeology at London's School of Oriental and African Studies. He has come back to China to try to trace the roots of one of the greatest mysteries in archaeology.
It was just so exciting for me to be there at Jiqudian. As a child, I read it in books as every other Chinese child. You read Jiqudian, you read Peking man, and you strongly believe that Peking men were the ancestors of the Chinese. I think it's just so important. I mean, I can't even describe with words how important it's to the Chinese. So this is the Peking man cave. And if you look at the roof, you can see the original roof and the entrance. And you can see the different layers of the cave. It is quite extraordinary to see that a little bit original cave still remain there. You can imagine the 500,000 years ago, and all the Peking men actually lived in this cave. And of course, during the years after the roof collapsed, and then to refine them was a huge task. You have to dig down all the way, I think it's about 30 meters deep. And you can see it's actually layered in different levels. I can imagine the feeling after kind of 500,000 years and the head Peking man skull was rediscovered.
While Chinese and Europeans laboured in the hills, in Peking, a Canadian doctor worked around the clock to build a picture of the ancient community of cave people. Davidson Black II was the leading light behind the Peking Man project. Following in his footsteps and trying to penetrate the riddle of the bones is the grandson who bears his name.
It's a family story, and it's a family story I've taken a great amount of interest in. I never met my grandfather, so I was enthralled with my dad's tales on what he was up to and all of that. Plus, you know, as a kid, any story about China, an intrigue, and a name that was famous within your family, really going to grab your attention. So I've been interested in this since probably 9, 10, 11, something like that.
A native of Toronto, Davidson Black IV starts his journey here in New York at the Museum of Natural History. At the beginning of the 1940s, as the Pacific War threatened the Peking Man dig, the museum was readied as a safe haven for the relics. Today, they have a gallery devoted to various kinds of early man and woman. Behind the scenes, physical anthropologist Gary Sawyer puts clay flesh on plaster bones.
The skeleton is the witness to what the individual was like, and that the bones speak to us, but they speak very softly. So softly we can't hear them, but as a physical anthropologist, we can see what they're trying to tell us. And in the case of Peking Man, as the excavations proceeded, more and more pieces were found, and we recognized the fossils as definitely being human, but something very, very different. And that very different thing being this really, really large ridge of bone that you could literally lay a pencil or something over it. That differs from modern humans in the fact that we can't quite do that.
Is it possible that for us to tell anything about Peking Man's personality or his lifestyle or the characteristics of how he worked around his environment?
That's a pretty tough question. The reconstruction gives us pretty much a physical appearance of Peking Man. That's a human face. Nobody can deny it. It's a bit primitive. They've got a lot more prognatism, more jutting forward of their face. We might want to compare it with the Neanderthals. And this is a reconstruction I did some years ago of a Neanderthal woman. Neanderthals did not paint beautiful murals on the walls of caves. The Cro-Magnons did. We are the descendants of the Cro-Magnon. In most probability, I would say, these people were functional human beings, but they were not like you and me.
Gary Sawyer has only plaster casts of the remains for reference. Like so many around the world, the American Natural History Museum was anxious for copies of the famous bones, and Peking was happy to make them, which turned out to be very fortunate. China and Japan had been at war since 1937. The Japanese used the latest technology to terrify the civilian population. In some cities, the arrival of the enemy caused panic. In the capital, things were more orderly. Nevertheless, the Chinese feared the occupiers might steal Peking man, and American diplomats were persuaded to smuggle the fossils out of the country. Packed in 2 wooden crates, they left the Peking Union Medical College for the US Embassy. There are countless theories about what happened next, but no bones.
I was waiting for Dave, or Davidson Black Fourth, and it was a strange feeling because I felt I knew him already, and also I believe as a grandson of Davidson Black, he would have much opportunity to get more information from the witnesses because they all knew his grandfather.
Wang Dao and Davidson Black have come in search not of fossils, but answers. Peking man may be lost forever, but how and where? What really happened back in the 1940s? Today, they entertain tourists and parties of schoolchildren, but 60 years ago, these caves echoed to the sound of hammers as technicians labored to uncover the fossil remains of Peking man. Peking has become modern Beijing. The Forbidden City now welcomes tourists and American fast food. Workers who once marched now drive. But faint echoes of the past remain. Wang Dao and Davidson Black must find the last survivors of the Peking Union Medical College team, the people who uncovered the 500,000-year-old relics. The city that Davidson's grandfather called home is being torn down, but in a back street, menaced by tower blocks, the medical college survives.
I was here 4 years ago, and it's absolutely amazing how much has changed since then.
Yeah, that is the biggest shopping mall in the world.
Really?
Let's go in.
Davidson Black II was a doctor who came to China to teach anatomy here at the college. But his real passion was the history of early man. Much has changed beyond these walls, but inside, it's as if time has stood still.
That's here. I think that's your grandfather's old office. I think that's the probably the old desk.
This is the desk. Look at that.
Shall I leave you here?
Yeah, take a bit of reflection, I think.
For a moment.
It's strange to think that this is the place where my grandfather worked for so long. Spent so many hours, and it's still here. All the original pieces. I can picture him walking around in here. I've seen many pictures of him at his desk, but it certainly is strange. This is also the site of his death. Very, very sudden as well. Working, and then dead. Apparently, the story goes that he was chatting with someone just a few hours prior to his death, and then he was found here, slumped right over it, with whatever he was working on at the time, be it a fossil of some kind, jumped down onto the ground with his body draped over it. Extremely sudden. And he knew, apparently, that he wasn't well and that things were serious. And he didn't tell anybody about that. He just wanted to keep going with the work and see how much he could get done. And with that knowledge in your mind, to be still putting in the hours that he was putting in is really testimony to the man himself.
Davidson's grandfather died long before the war, spared the agony of sending his fossils into the unknown. His colleagues were not so lucky. In the autumn of 1941, this basement echoed to the sound of frenzied packing as Hu Chengxi prepared the relics for their flight to safety.
I think this is a room Mr. Hu finally packed 2 boxes of Peking fossils. There were windows on both walls, now it's gone. But I think in this very room here, he wrapped them up and then put them into boxes. And I believe that is last time people saw it.
In each skull cap, I have used 6 papers. The first is a lens paper, and then the soft paper, and cotton, and gauze.
And then some padding on top of that into 2 relatively large wooden boxes, about 2/3 the size of this bench and about yay high.
If the small box drop down, we cannot damage the forces.
And from there put into 2 army footlockers. And I think from there, if the story is correct, that is, from there they were taken off to the American embassy. But again, I must remember, at this time there must have been sheer panic, almost sheer panic, because Beijing was occupied at this point, and Westerners and various other people, I imagine, getting everything together and get out as soon as they possibly could, gathering their worldly possessions and personal possessions.
Just days after the fossils were packed and sent off, Japanese aircraft bombed the US fleet at Pearl Harbor, and America declared war. Mr. Hu is the last official known to have handled the fossils. He worked on the plaster casts and lived in Peking under Japanese rule. For Dow and Davidson, he's a vital witness.
After the Pearl Harbor, all the Japanese troops occupied the Peking Union Medical College. Therefore, I escaped to South China.
What do you think happened to them?
It's very difficult to say. In that time, is during the World War II, especially in China. I think all the troops of Japan didn't care anything.
They didn't care, so they destroyed them.
Yeah. Because all the soldiers was concentrated the fight. He didn't care the culture or some other. Therefore, I have no idea.
Mr. Hu had left Beijing the day after I think he had finished packing all the fossils together, which meant that he wouldn't have seen them actually en route to the embassy, which is quite frustrating because that, I think, is a real key to this mystery.
Mr. Hu's name was on a list carried by the squad of intelligence officers who arrived at the medical college on a special mission from the Imperial Palace. The Emperor himself wanted the fossils found and delivered to Tokyo, but they were gone. The staff were interrogated, and then began the search for those who had got away. Agents went into the maze of alleys beneath the walls of the Forbidden City. The man they were looking for had also escaped to the country. The Chinese academic in charge of the dig in the hills was a national hero, with a penchant for adventure and with matinee idol looks.
Yeah, meeting Jia Lampo was very special indeed. I knew of his relationship with my grandfather, and that he was instrumental later on, after my grandfather's death, in continuing the excavations of the Zhougoudian site. He was also, I knew he was 93 years old, so I didn't really know what to expect. But I had it on good authority that he was still very sharp, very quick. And I was wondering what he would think when he saw me, and if he would make the connection that I was the grandson of Davidson Black, someone that he knew quite well. When I went up to the apartment, he was helped out of his chair, but he was very bright-eyed, and when introduced to me, I got the sense that he instantly recognized who I was, and he gave me a very warm handshake and a very warm smile, and he stopped, interrupted a conversation that was going on to lean over to me and tell me that each day he would wake up and look at the paintings and the pictures in his apartment, and he would each day look at them and refresh his memory of those happy times in his life, each and every day. And that really, I found that really touching. That's a great picture. There he is.
It was such an exciting moment for us to meet Professor Jia Lanpo. Like all the great scholars study, it's a treasure trove. It has everything, all the new publications and all the original materials. Right, even the original drawings, he managed to smuggle out from Peking Uni Medical College under the Japanese occupation.
没有感不到什么猜测，当时丢了这个好像想这
He
时候在想。
got back, of course, the Peking fossils were missing. And like many other people, they thought the Japanese got them.
He thought the Japanese had taken them.
Yeah, Japanese took them away out somehow. But later on, he heard that the boxes were actually moved by the Americans. So if the Japanese soldiers found that, what would they do? Because that time, if they found food, they ate them. If they found the drink, they drank them. So they could take everything they want. However, these two boxes, so meticulously wrapped and packed. I mean, they're all wrapped with 4 layers of papers.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody who saw it would think it's something valuable. So what would happen to them?
I am getting a little frustrated with the language barrier. I knew that was going to be a problem, of course, because I'm not fluent at all in Mandarin. But I did grow up in a house that did speak Mandarin fluently, so I've been around it. And I was here 4 years ago studying Mandarin, but I didn't get far enough to be able to catch hardly anything of what's being said. I originally assumed, before I came out, that the fossils had been destroyed by the Japanese. Now, I'm not so sure. I think with the more information that's coming out, it's becoming increasingly less likely to me that they would have been destroyed by the Japanese. So I personally think that they're still here somewhere. Well, the next day we went off of the train station en route to take a 5-hour journey out to Qingwandao. And as usual, it was extremely cold. When we arrived at this train station, it was just a real sight, something I had never experienced before. People toing and froing, of all manner of distinction and lack thereof.
Just hours after Pearl Harbor, a detachment of US Marines stationed in Peking were detailed to collect 2 wooden boxes from the US Embassy and make for this railway station. They were bound for the coast, a liner sent by Washington, and the safety of the West. The contents of the boxes represented China's history, culture, and pride. The Marines travelled this line to the port of Qinghuangdao. Along with the fossils, they carried diplomatic records, personal effects, and 1 million rounds of ammunition. The simplest version of events states that Japanese soldiers boarded the train, arrested the Marines, stole their food, and threw away 2 seemingly worthless boxes of old bones, according to one account, that is.
It's very possible that had the theories correct, that is, that the Japanese had sacked the train and damaged the skulls and chucked them out the windows, that people on this train would have been able to look out and see one of the most important discoveries of mankind scattered about on the sides of the road. Amazing.
Yeah, that would be kind of a interesting story, but if we believe 2 boxes were packed so meticulously, and anybody who saw it would think it's great treasure, and they would take care of it, even the Japanese soldiers.
So we know that they arrived on the train, they were driven to the train and dropped off, but do we know that they were actually received on the other end?
That's the puzzle need to be solved, because we know there are so many kind of American informers now say they got the boxes, and some of them say they were buried, or soldiers buried them in Qinghuangdao, or later on say in Tianjin. But that is something we need to kind of investigate.
What I'm wondering is if they were buried by the Marines in the other end of the line, surely that information would have been recorded somewhere. And now with all the speculation over where these bones are, there must be a record. There must be some kind of tangible evidence that would point out exactly the location of these bones.
Time distorts memory. War confuses everything. Other accounts say the fossils may have left Peking before Pearl Harbor and reached Qinghuangdao unmolested, going into storage in a military warehouse, and then disappearing. Perhaps the 2 boxes were carried across these tracks and into the maze of tumble-down wharfs. Perhaps the pair can find someone who remembers the 60-year-old events. Perhaps they can find the actual warehouse. It's here somewhere. Perhaps. If the US Marines did get down to Key Number 6, hoping to rendezvous with the liner, touring the Pacific picking up stray citizens, they were in for a shock.
We went down to the dock areas, which is the area where the USS Harrison most likely would have docked had she not run aground on purpose. And it was, again, extremely cold. It must have been a good -30, perhaps -35 even, for the whole water area was encased in ice.
This is where the American Marines were waiting for President Harrison to pick them up, together with the food logs. Unfortunately, we know the warship never arrived here. It was sunken in the Yangtze River.
Yes, and
the sea is frozen today. I think it's first time for the last 20, 30 years.
Frozen in ice, but not in time, the old port is being redeveloped. Camp Holcomb, the local US Marine base, where the fossils might also have come, made way for a block of flats just last year. Yet another disappearance in the story of Peking Man. In winter 1941, Chinese scientists and American diplomats conspired to save the remains of Peking Man from agents of the Japanese emperor. The US Marine Corps may have managed to get them to the port of Qinghuangdao and a safe warehouse. Wang Dao and Davidson Black have come to find it. Dao has pulled strings, borrowing a photograph of the army warehouse and a map of the old port from the new Port Authority.
Many of the people that around were quite old and of course would have been alive at the time of this incident. So we were hoping perhaps to have a chat with any passers-by or anyone we could get hold of really who might be able to give us some information on the period in question.
哎，你好，那个对不起，我想问一下，就这个我们现在是在什么地方？大街您可以看出来，大街是我们现在大街应该还是没变，是吧？大街还在这。邮局会不会就还是这个邮局？说不定还是这个邮局。就是它，老邮局。
And there were all manner of colorful people wandering about. Very helpful, extremely helpful, at least willing to give information. And the one that stood out in my mind particularly was the owner of a local hair salon who gave us some instructions but told us that he had some people inside the salon who actually knew exactly where it was.
This lady has been working here for 30 years. If anyone knows, she'll be the person.
She'll know.
Yeah. 这个就是主要就是我们找这个原来。
I was quite pleasantly surprised with the friendliness and the willingness to answer questions to two total strangers.
That lady was certainly the right person to ask. She still remembered where this place could be.
So it must be here.
Must be around there somewhere.
Yeah, the person just told us this is the old site, but it doesn't look like it.
Well, it's supposed to be, according to what we've been looking at, right around here somewhere, so I think we're gonna get lucky here.
No, it's a car park. It's garage.
Oh, it must have been torn down.
老师，那个问您件事，就我们现在这个地方是不是就原来那个在哪呢？
美国营盘在哪呢？在南边呢，还。德式谷仓库，德式谷的那边呢。就这儿，就这。南头呢。
What's he saying?
They are having an argument. He believes it's somewhere else, but
Here's another opinion. Let's see what he thinks. And the two of them got into this most heated argument. And Tao told me later, again, this is all happening in Mandarin. And he gave me a little aside during the whole melee and said that he actually thought these two guys might actually start fighting. They were really disagreeing. And finally it all broke up, but we left with the impression that this definitely was the site of the old warehouse. So what he's saying?
He's saying when he was a little boy, he played in this warehouse.
Oh, that's nice.
If the bones were ever in the warehouse, they're not there now. But there's yet another lead to follow. The FBI files contain interviews with a number of Marine veterans who claim they were the guardians of the bones and buried them in the grounds of another medical college in a different port, Tianjin. With time running out, the pair have rented some high technology. The ground-penetrating radar should enable them to locate objects buried under what is now a basketball court, if they're there.
Today we're going to Tianjin. Tianjin is a very old traditional port town as well, and was also American Marine base. We know two food lockers containing Peking fossils could also go to Tianjin, to the American Marine base. So we're going to have a final attempt to see if we can find any clue.
This is a concrete lead to a precise location where the precious remains could be right beneath the investigators' feet.
Here we go. Okay.
Dave was not convinced by this new piece of equipment we had. Myself, I'm not a very technology person neither, but I think we could just be lucky.
Oh, this is getting very frustrating. No one's ever been here before with an equipment as we're using, metal detecting devices. And we're running out of time and light. And so far, we found nothing.
They're not the first to pace this court. In 1980, Dr. Harry Shapiro of New York's Natural History Museum came here on holiday with a bucket and spade.
Yep, stop, yep. And I think he convinced the authority actually that leaves a dig, but he didn't find anything. Nothing here. Off we go. So he was regretting that he didn't have any proper equipment. Now we have this thing now, and but it still didn't give us any new clue. Here we go. Nope. Okay, no.
Nothing?
Nothing. Yep. Go. Yeah, maybe it's the bloody snow, kind of a stop or proper reading. No.
This is very frustrating.
No. Bloody machine.
Anything?
Nope. Nothing. I guess that's it. We've got to end, Dave.
Jeez.
That's our last chance,
Yeah.
and it's gone.
A little frustrating. The only thing we accomplished out here is getting bloody cold.
The trail runs out at the sea. If the remains did make the journey to the coast and leave China, it may have been in the extreme care of an enemy, not an ally. The Chinese people have long believed that the special agents of Emperor Hirohito did locate the fossils and spirit them away to a glass cabinet somewhere in Tokyo. For Dow and Davidson, it's the next port of call.
I love Japanese people. I have no problem with them, but I think it's always something between the Chinese-Japanese competition or rivalry. So I think the story of Peking Man certainly got the Japanese on the wrong side.
It's fair to assume that the Japanese might know something about the fate of the remains. In 1945, the Emperor's collection of curiosities was found to contain fragments of other notable early humans, some from Indonesia and others from China. Wang Dao has already contacted the Imperial Palace asking for permission to visit and received a rejection. The Public Relations Department insists that they have no knowledge of the whereabouts of the relics and won't even discuss the story. Dao is not the only one to come up against a great wall of silence. The Japanese researcher reports to their executive capsule hotel.
Our poor interpreter, Yoshiko, she was somewhat embarrassed because of the lack of information that we were getting. For some reason, the Japanese got very uncomfortable when we mentioned the fossils themselves.
Yes. Is there any possibility to find some old Japanese soldiers who are willing to talk to us?
Yeah, there is one old guy who was stationed in China. I said, can we interview him? And he said, well, he can talk about it only for 30 minutes, and he doesn't want to be on camera. That's the deal.
But he will talk about it.
Well, yeah, he can talk about how it was during the war, because he was stationed in China, and he seems to know about the Peking man's bone story. It doesn't mean he knows about it, but he was asked by someone else before.
Well, that would be great.
So.
At least it's something for us.
Yeah, somebody who lived at the time.
Yoshiko manages to persuade the long-retired veteran of the Japanese Intelligence Corps to talk on condition that he is filmed in a face-saving way.
So as a Japanese soldier, does he know the actual situation of the Japanese army? What kind of soldiers they were and what kind of a communication system they had?
Establishing communications among different posts wasn't so difficult because the areas chosen for occupation tended to have good access. But the military units were quite small and spread out, so I wouldn't say it was ever easy to reach them. But they weren't situated that far apart, so it wasn't terribly difficult to communicate either. We didn't really have problems in that respect.
And Yoshiko, I'd also really like to know about the discipline in the Japanese army. I'm thinking along the lines of if a Japanese soldier of lower rank had come across these trunks containing the fossils, would it have been possible for him to have destroyed them of his own accord, or would his discipline have been so strong to keep him from touching them?
I don't think any Japanese soldier would ever have stepped out of line like that. Also, we were not well educated enough to recognize Peking man's bones. Probably Japanese academics who knew all about the history of Peking man would have known what they were, and I suppose they could have done it.
From the information from the Japanese soldier, the communication was very good at that time. It made it a story that the Japanese soldiers randomly destroyed these boxes very unlikely.
Yoshiko's Lost Contact is an author who wrote a book about Peking man in the 1970s. It doesn't seem to have included a chapter on the emperor's collections.
We know that the Japanese emperor at that time was very interested in natural sciences, and he actually had a collection of fossils. Do you think, or does he think, the Japanese emperor would be interested in Chinese fossils?
まあ昭和天皇、日本の天皇が
だからちょっとその考え方違うと思います僕は。
I don't think so. Japanese emperor never be interested in fossils. He was interested in plants more likely, like moss or this any ancient old plants. He's never been interested in fossils.
But he actually had the Solomon from Java in his collection.
ジャワそうですね。
ジャワのそれっていうのを持ってたっていう話を聞いた。
だけどやっぱりそうわかりませんけどね。ただ。
Yeah, probably he was really very interested in, but it's not that into it. He just happened to have it, or someone just gave it to him, or.
In his personal opinion, do you think that he thinks the war has somewhat of an influence on these kind of conflicting stories? Just the atmosphere of war in general gives an air of reluctance?
ですね、例えばその北京原人のね、骨の行方っていうことに関して。
そういう話出てくると思いますよ。
I really think so. It's something to do with the war issue because China really don't like Japan. I mean, between China and Japan, we have really bad confliction. They even hate us. That's why they believe we have it.
Dow and Davidson have finished their Asian investigation. They've examined the best-known theories, interviewed the witnesses, and visited the key locations associated with the last days of Peking man's half-million-year story. They've reached firm conclusions, but they're different.
Dave now was convinced that the fossils never left China, and they were still in Peking or somewhere around the railway line. But for me, I actually had a very opposite opinion. I think these things had left China and, of course, could go to Japan or the United States.
Back in the West, Davidson tests his theory that the answer to the riddle lies in paperwork, that America is the land of the free and freedom of information.
Some months later, I learned of a new lead, which was some information that was housed at the National Archives in Washington. And it's one of the frustrating things about this search has been all the bureaucracy that we've encountered. But it also comes with a bit of a benefit, because each turn that these people were taking were meticulously written down and cataloged, and all of this information was stored for public viewing in Washington. They left the PUMC, we know that. They went en route to the embassy, and from the embassy they were designed to be taken by train to Shenzhen or off to Qinghuandao, where they'd be shipped off with the rest of the American personal kit and en route to safety. That's what theory is. And all we know for a fact is that they were actually loaded from the PUMC en route to the embassy. But according to this, Mr. Buttrick says that he never received them. They never got there. which means they disappeared en route somehow. I can't personally imagine how they would have disappeared, but according to all these documents, they did disappear, which means they're either still in China or possibly stolen by somebody. Who knows?
At London University, Dr. Wong Dao remains convinced the bones found their way to America safe and sound, but are still as lost as ever.
In a way, I don't buy this theory. I think the bones could leave the Peking Medical Union Hospital and then transported to the Marine base. So the embassy didn't have it. That's true. And of course, we know after the war, many belongings of American soldiers and also foreign residents in China were sent back through private arrangement to the United States. So the Peking Man fossil could be among them. So it could be still in someone's attic, and nobody has noticed them. Of course, in the 1970s, there were some search, but I don't think the search was very thorough, and we need to get to the bottom of these stories.
It's possible that Peking Man is buried again, beneath the clutter of 21st century life, in someone's basement, that one of the US Marines charged with getting the bones home took the orders too literally. Christopher Janus believes that's what happened, that his fleeting contact with the elusive widow remains the best evidence yet that Peking Man still exists.
Now, the FBI made a big report on this. Especially I wanted her to investigate and see if she could find this woman. And I don't think they came up with anything, but they made a report and they sent me a copy of the report. You ought to take a look at that report if you can get it in the FBI. I think they probably think that the Empire State Woman was a fake. I don't know. But that picture is not a fake. What is in it may be a fake, but the picture's not a fake, and the woman isn't a fake. And but the fact that she's disappeared is unexplainable.
The Japanese tourist at the Empire State Building sent Janus his photo of the agitated woman that the FBI could never find. The woman herself thought better of her actions and sent him the photograph of her legacy. Experts examined it and argued. The box was too big, the thigh bones were all wrong, but the skull in the corner, half buried in the straw, might just be the only trace of the missing link.